of the center statue in Baghdad of Saddam Hussein, wanting to pull down not only the dictatorship, but the symbolism of the dictatorship. That statue and other statues all around the nation clearly are coming down. Still, a note of caution from CENTCOM, from Central Command, saying that this war is not over yet. There may well be pockets of resistance within Baghdad that haven't yet been found, and there are other areas in Iraq itself, like Tikrit, for example, the hometown of Saddam Hussein, that needs to be dealt with extreme caution. Let's listen again to David Chater talking to one of our GIs.
Sky News here, so perhaps we can ask the studio doctor to help us out.
I'm just a corpsman. I know some enough to keep my Marines alive.
But you're a medic, yeah?
Huh?
Yeah, take that photograph and I'll get back to you. We'll have a look at that photograph he's taking. It's a great little scene. That's great. Yeah, so you're a medic with the U.S. Marine Corps?
Yes, corpsman.
A corpsman.
We're a corpsman. We're a breed of our own.
Yeah, I can see that already. So what's it been like?
I tell you, I've gone from terrified to even grieving, seemed like grieving my own death. But I've worked my way through, and it's gone to acceptance and loving my wife even more, and getting back. I know you want to get to this rope pulling here.
I'm sure it's going well.
Okay.
But it's great to see you here. And if you can give any help to these guys, I'm sure we really appreciate it.
The language barrier is the toughest.
Yeah, tell me. Yeah. Good luck.
Hey, baby, I love you.
So there we are. The noose is.
All right, as we continue to keep an eye on these extraordinary scenes coming to you from the heart of downtown Baghdad, as the Iraqi citizens themselves finally feel free to throw off the decades-long yoke of Saddam Hussein. Let's check in with our Rick Leventhal with the 1st Regiment, 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines. He's at a spot where there isn't quite so much jubilation, but clearly the Marines and the people there know the end is coming for Saddam.
Threat around here, all it takes is one shot for some of these guys, and we're looking to try to keep that suppressed as much as possible, find them before they get to us, and draw some fire, figure out exactly where they are, and focus our fire where it needs to be instead of in innocent populations.
But clearly the scenes we're seeing now, that's a good sign. It's an indication that this thing's about over.
Absolutely. We just need to get the word out. Maybe the guys who still have arms will lay them down and do the right thing.
And as you say that, we hear more. What was that, do you think? Artillery?
Artillery rounds.
Yeah. So there's still targets out here, obviously. What's your feeling as you look at these pictures?
Oh, nice feeling to see, and obviously we're all waiting for that. I know that we have a few miles left, but there's a lot of work left to be done, obviously.
Well, do you have any idea what they're shooting at right now?
I have no idea, and hopefully it's out shooting. No, they're shooting.
Yeah. We did hear some sporadic gunfire earlier today. Sounded like some AK-47s. We also know that some of the Marines were firing at positions in this vicinity, and they found a number of anti-aircraft weapons and a lot of munitions out here, but it doesn't seem like there's been as much resistance today. Certainly, Fox Company got a lot more last night than you guys have gotten so far, so hopefully it'll stay that way. Hopefully we won't see the resistance that they've been seeing. Back to you guys.
Reports this morning saying it is still a mystery. Some reports saying that he may well still be alive.
Well, it was thought that we may have been able to blow him away a couple of days ago with those 4 JDAMs, 8,000 pounds of munitions on top of where he was supposedly meeting with members of the Ba'ath Party and his sons. Now, our own Greg Kelly, who was embedded with the 3rd Infantry, I believe, just went by Uday's son. Uday is one of the 2 sons. Uday is the one who has some of the nastiest habits, very nasty character indeed. And in that house, apparently Greg Kelly found, among other things, supplies from UNICEF. Now, you may remember that UN oil for food program, in which food was supposed to go from proceeds of Iraqi oil to the people of Iraq. Well, guess where at least some of it went? According to our own Greg Kelly, who saw it with his own eyes in Uday's house, went to the very son of Saddam Hussein. UNICEF supplies. There were other things that were found there, of course, including weaponry, alcohol, and a whole bunch of other stuff, which Greg Kelly's going to bring us.
John, report from CENTCOM. They don't want to take anything for granted. Nobody does. Certainly this war has been full of surprises, safe to say. They're being cautiously optimistic this morning as they look at these pictures. They say there still are pockets of resistance. One of the expected pockets of resistance, as this young man starts to climb up the rope, which is presumably the one attached to the statue of Saddam, one of the believed pockets of resistance, Al Mansour, a somewhat affluent, if you will, neighborhood where there are believed to be a lot of Ba'ath Party loyalists. That was the area that took such a shellacking the other day in the bombing that was intended to get Saddam Hussein. Let's listen once again to David Chater, as this guy's really putting some muscle into it now.
One way or another, you're trying to bring down the regime of Saddam Hussein. This guy's doing it the old-fashioned way, the sledgehammer against the dictator. One would think of David and Goliath, perhaps. Once again, in this case, it appears the Davids on the ground believe that they're able to take on the Goliath of Saddam Hussein, and that he indeed is about to fall. John Scott is in CENTCOM, where I hope they are seeing these pictures, John.
When they haven't been able to say or do.
They are glued to the screen, David. Both the media are absolutely riveted by these pictures, as are the folks at CENTCOM inside. But of course, they still have a war to win. This thing is not over yet, and some dark and perhaps dangerous days still lie ahead. And it's something I wanted to bring up as we watch these scenes of great jubilation on the streets of Baghdad. Let's not forget that in at least 80 households across America, there are soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines who are not coming home. They have given everything they can for this conflict. They have given their lives. In Great Britain, more than 30 soldiers have lost their lives. This has to be a very bittersweet moment for those families to watch these pictures, to know that the people of Baghdad, the people of Iraq are in the process of being liberated right now. They are absolutely so overjoyed, but in those households, these pictures are very bittersweet indeed, and I would just urge all Americans to remember their sacrifice, and perhaps if you know someone who lost a loved one in the combat here, offer them whatever help you can, perhaps offer them a prayer. But let's not forget the supreme sacrifice that more than 80 Americans have made to this point, and more than 30 British officers as well. David, Bridget?
Well, John, it's a wonderful sentiments, and of course we can never forget those who have died, those who have been injured, and indeed, willingly, of course, though it's been a remarkable 3 weeks, an incredible speed with which this operation has taken place. Still, it has not been without severe consequences, not only to our own troops, but to a lot of innocent Iraqis as well.
Interesting also, David, as we continue to watch the pictures of our troops roaming freely through the heart of Baghdad this morning. Interesting to note really how far they had to come. The Army coming from the west, the Marines coming from the east, converging in Baghdad, if you will, and really such a
Well, nothing at all, I mean, except for ongoing speculation here that perhaps he did not die in Monday's raid on the Al Mansour district of Baghdad. Perhaps he hightailed it and made it to his hometown of Tikrit, even perhaps suggestions that he's out of the country. I mean, Rita Cosby was reporting earlier in the week that before that attack was launched on the Al Mansour building, there were conversations heard inside relating to a possible flight to Syria, but at this point it's total speculation. If he's gone to Tikrit, and if other members of the regime, let's not forget the information minister, Mr. Al-Sahaf, who perhaps wisely decided to take a holiday day today and not head to work. We don't know where he is, we don't know where Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz is, we don't know where the Vice President is, the Defense Minister. These are leading members of the regime who could try and pop up in various places. If they've headed to Tikrit, I think they're in for a pretty hard landing, because US forces are clearly now going to turn their fire onto that city, Saddam Hussein's birthplace, a place where traditionally the infrastructure has been built deliberately to support the regime of Saddam Hussein, and in a sense, perhaps to act as a bolt hole. Bridget?
All right, Simon, this is David. I just wanted to let you know, by the way, officials, it is focused on the government and officials from the Saddam Hussein regime, not on private businesses. We just wanted to emphasize that, at least for now. Anything could happen, of course, and that's going to be one of the key jobs of our troops on the ground, is to establish a sense of order so that things don't devolve into chaos.
Let's go.
One section of Baghdad. Now, that doesn't mean, as John Scott wisely has been pointing out, and we've heard from CENTCOM and even now from the President, that things are over. Things are not over. The battle for other parts, securing other parts of Baghdad and, of course, other parts of Iraq continues, but the Republic of Fear, at least in the heart of Baghdad, appears to be ended.
You mentioned other parts of Iraq, Dave, one of those being the northern part of the country, which is, of course, home to Saddam Hussein's homeland. We're talking about Tikrit, and some people have said that they still have battles ahead there. Some people have even suggested that if Saddam Hussein survived the latest bombing in the Al-Mansour neighborhood of Baghdad, perhaps, somehow, goodness knows how he did it, that he might have managed to escape somehow to Tikrit. But again, this is all speculation. There's no confirmation whatsoever on the whereabouts, dead or alive, of Saddam Hussein this morning.
There have been other dictators who have fallen and have gone elsewhere who didn't have that sort of cult of personality I was talking about. Idi Amin from Africa, for example, who's still alive. He was a brute. He was just as brutish as Saddam Hussein, just as much of a pathological liar, etc. He's now living in Saudi Arabia with
living
no
a pretty
chance.
good life, right?
The point is, he has no chance of going back as dictator because of the fact that he lost his power of persuasion, the fear factor is gone, and he lost his cash to bribe people. The same, even if Saddam Hussein survives somehow all these devastating strikes, chances of him mounting power again, getting his statues re-erected after this one comes down, are pretty slim.
And it'll be interesting to see more reaction through the day from the Arab world as well, as we continue to watch the pictures of the efforts to bring down the statue of Saddam Hussein. Our latest report from Simon Marks in Amman, Jordan, saying that, yes, they are seeing the pictures that you're seeing right now, and that the reaction over there in Amman, Jordan, at least so far, has been, well, subdued. When he starts to speak, we'll take you there live. We are also expecting to hear from the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, and that is coming up at 12:45 Eastern Time. And there's Dick Cheney right now. Let's take a listen.
Last year, it's proof positive of the success of our efforts to transform our military to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Having been involved in planning and waging the Persian Gulf War in 1991, far better than we did a dozen years ago. In Desert Storm, only 20% of our air-to-ground fighters could guide a laser-guided bomb to target. Today, all of our air-to-ground fighters have that capability. In Desert Storm, it usually took up to 2 days for target planners to get a photo of a target, confirm its coordinates, plan the mission, and deliver it to the bomber crew. Now we have near real-time imaging of targets with photos and coordinates transmitted by email to aircraft already in flight. In Desert Storm, battalion, brigade, and division commanders had to rely on maps, grease pencils, and radio reports to track the movements of our forces. Today, our commanders have a real-time display of our own forces on their computer screens. In Desert Storm, we did not yet have the B-2, but that aircraft is now critical to our operations, and on a single bombing sortie, a B-2 can hit 16 separate targets, each with a 2,000-pound precision-guided, satellite-based weapon. The superior technology we now possess is perhaps the most obvious difference between the Gulf War and the present conflict. But there are many others. Desert Storm began with a 38-day air campaign, followed by a brief ground attack. In Operation Iraqi Freedom, the ground war began before the air war. In 1991, Saddam Hussein had time to set Kuwait's oil fields ablaze. In the current conflict, forces sent in early protected the 600 oil fields in southern Iraq, prevented an environmental catastrophe, and safeguarded a resource that's vital for the future of the people of Iraq. During Operation Desert Storm, Saddam managed to fire Scud missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia. This time was different, again thanks to our Special Operations Forces, which seized control of the missile launch baskets in western Iraq, preventing their use by the enemy. Our Special Ops Forces, joined by those of the British, the Australian, and the Polish allies, have played a vital role in the success of the current campaign. During Operation Desert Storm, we faced a massive flow of refugees in need of aid and shelter. But so far in Operation Iraqi Freedom, We've averted a large-scale humanitarian crisis. U.S. and Royal Marines succeeded in taking the Al-Fa Peninsula and cleared a path for humanitarian aid. And today, even as fighting continues, coalition forces are bringing food and water and medical supplies to liberated Iraqis. Looking at the overall effort, Saddam Hussein apparently expected that this war would essentially be a replay of Desert Storm. And although he realized that some 250,000 Americans and coalition forces were stationed in the Gulf on the eve of the war, he seems to have assumed there was ample time to destroy the oil fields he had rigged to explode and the bridges that he had wired. But the tactics employed by General Franks were bold. They made the most of every technological advantage of our military, and they succeeded in taking the enemy by surprise. Let me quote the military historian Victor Davis Hanson, writing several days ago. By any fair standard of even the most dazzling charges in military history, the Germans in the Ardennes in the spring of 1940 or Patton's romp in July of 1944, the present race to Baghdad, is unprecedented in its speed and daring and in the lightness of its casualties. Hansen calls the campaign historically unprecedented and predicts that its logistics will be studied for decades. Bottom line, with less than half of the ground forces and two-thirds of the air assets used 12 years ago in Desert Storm, Secretary Rumsfeld and General Franks have achieved a far more difficult objective. Yet until this war is fully won, we cannot be overconfident in our position, and we must not underestimate the desperation of whatever forces remain loyal to the dictator. We know full well the nature.
All right, we are going to be coming back to Vice President Dick Cheney, but for a moment we're taking you to this spectacular scene in Baghdad. The heart of the regime, the heart of the country, the heart of the dictatorship appears about ready to fall. You can see Iraqis struggling in any way they can to bring down that statue. They picked up a sledgehammer, were pounding the base of this statue. You can see the remnants of it at the bottom of that pounding session. But now, after having tied a noose around the neck of the symbol of the Republic of Fear, they are desperately trying to bring down that symbol, to bring down the statue as the regime of the Public of Fear appears to be falling down all around Baghdad. And now a U.S. tank has been brought in apparently to help in the demolition. And we have seen a reluctance on the part of U.S. troops to help out these particular scenes and not giving the impression of anything other than a liberation led up to by the Iraqi people themselves. But it appears here that the folks of Baghdad need a little help in what they're doing right now. Bridge?
Well, we've seen that one guy, David, with a sledgehammer just going after the statue as the others continue to tie the rope around the statue of Saddam Hussein. It's taken them the better part of an hour, but not that long when you consider the decades of repression in Iraq. And again, as you pointed out, David, we were surprised that that tank had not been there a little while ago. We were surprised. We were thinking that the Americans might refrain from taking part in anything like that, but perhaps they are just still in the bystander role at this point.
Now remember, these people have heard nothing for the past 30 years but propaganda from the regime of Saddam Hussein. The propaganda net had been so tight around Baghdad itself that most of those people there could only hear from hearsay and the grapevine other information about the way the world really works. So these folks have been told right up until yesterday that everything was fine with the Saddam Hussein regime, that the Americans were being whipped, that they had been kicked out of the airport, of Saddam Airport as they were still calling it. Well, suddenly tanks roll into the heart of Baghdad. The information minister, or the minister of misinformation as he's known to have been called, is nowhere to be seen. We are getting reports still about Saddam Hussein's whereabouts, that he may be here, he may be there. Even if he were to pop up at this point, it appears that the fear with which he has governed this country has now dissipated to the point where people don't care whether he's alive or not. they're going to bring him down.
And still, David, despite these scenes of jubilation and this continuing scene of the Iraqi people trying to bring down the statue of Saddam, we've heard really nothing but, again, it bears repeating, cautious optimism from Washington. We were watching Dick Cheney, the vice president, just a few moments ago, saying, yes, the campaign is proceeding with speed and success, but saying that there are still pockets of resistance. So they really don't want to take part in any kind of gloating. And we also heard similar language from the president with a comment just a little while ago. Not that we saw him, there was a statement released from the White House saying that progress is being made. They seem very, very careful not to gloat and not to declare victory.
Now,
we fill you in on what is going on at this hour. We have been watching this picture on Firdos Square for the better part of an hour. Iraqi citizens coming out a couple hours ago, pelting the statue of Saddam Hussein with shoes. They later brought out a ladder, scaled the pedestal to the top of the statue, wrapped a noose around Saddam Hussein's neck, and they've been trying to go it alone without any kind of military equipment here, and that obviously hasn't worked quite yet. We only saw what appeared to be one sledgehammer that they were exchanging. We saw a very strong, probably 250-pound Iraqi starting at it and then sharing the sledgehammer with much slighter Iraqis to have at the base here, and this is what it looks like at this hour. We now have Ken Pollock with us to give us a broad view on what this is we're witnessing here. Ken, welcome.
I mean, I think what you're seeing is the start of the collapse of this regime, the final death throes of this regime. The Iraqi people recognize that the U.S. and the British are here to stay. They are not going to abandon them once again. Of course, that was one of the great fears of so many Iraqis, having seen the U.S. march into Iraq in 1991, only to pull back at the last minute before removing Saddam's regime. I think increasingly they've got the sense that Saddam truly is finished. There probably are rumors spreading all throughout Baghdad as to whether he's alive, whether he's dead, that he's fled. And that's also a point to remember, is, as we saw with that incredibly dramatic footage from Marty Savage, this isn't over yet. Saddam still has loyalists out there. He may still well be alive. His sons may still be alive. And there are also parts of Iraq that are not yet under the coalition's control. In particular, Saddam's hometown of Tikrit. And chances are there are a lot of his loyalists who are holding up in Tikrit. And that too will remain a running sore until that is reduced.
And is the expectation that any of those forces in Tikrit who are loyal to him will come to Baghdad, or they'll stay in Tikrit?
My guess is that those forces will stay in Tikrit, but again, as Marty Savage found, there are still forces in Baghdad who remain loyal to Saddam. And many of the former Republican guards and the Fedayeen are probably dressed now in civilian clothes, and we could see over the next couple of weeks sporadic terrorist attacks by the Fedayeen even in Baghdad. If they get the chance, if they get the opportunity to take a shot at American servicemen or maybe at a group of Iraqis who are celebrating Saddam's demise, it's not impossible that you couldn't see attacks on those groups of people over the next few months until the U.S. and coalition forces working with Iraqis can root them out. And that really is the major change going on here, which is that the Fedayeen rely on the quiescence of the populace to be able to carry out their attacks. If the populace is willing to take an active role against them and support coalition measures against them, the ability of the Fedayeen to operate is going to diminish very quickly. So the hope is that the people of Baghdad will increasingly cooperate with the coalition, help them root out these Fedayeen. Over the last 3 weeks is that they are so terrified of Saddam Hussein's regime that they were unwilling to take real action against it while there was any real doubt in their mind. So the more people are coming into the streets, this is just reinforcing the sense that Saddam truly is finished.
Christiane Amanpour joins us from Kuwait City. And Christiane, that's a point you've been making about how emboldened at least these people in the central part of Baghdad are feeling right now to even be standing in the square and trying to take down this statue.
Yes, and we've seen some of that as the troops have rolled up from the south. I think what's remarkable there, though, is given the U.S. forces worry about attacks on them, and you've just heard Simon talking about some of them who didn't even want to accept the flowers in some of the cities. Here you've got Iraqis climbing all over a Marine armored vehicle there, and there are Iraqis standing on that vehicle, and the Marines are mingling inside that pocket of people there. And it seems that, this is one of the biggest shows of sort of support that we've seen yet. A couple of other issues, you were talking with Simon about the human shields. Well, there was a very eloquent, if not explicit, sign that was being held up by 2 Iraqis there, and watch the vehicle go into the bottom of that plinth now, basically saying, "Go home, you human shields." Simon also saying that the manager of the Palestine hotel had welcomed the Marines in. Well, just some anecdotal addition to that from our sources in Baghdad. The manager today was calling when he was contacted by phone for Marines to come and help out because they are afraid of the looters, and we have been seeing that in other parts of Baghdad and in other parts of the Iraqi cities that have been freed of the regime and the structure there. And so amid the scenes of jubilation, somewhat small at the moment, but perhaps will grow, there are also fears about law and order, not just amongst the population, but also from the military that is not fully equipped to be policing these kinds of situations. They don't believe that to be their mandate in general. And certainly, again, Basra being the example of what we're seeing now, the British saying that they weren't fully equipped or prepared to do the policing, and they were going to let the Iraqis let off steam, do the looting they wanted, and try to sort of establish some kind of locally inspired control in Basra, certainly, and perhaps it'll peter out in Baghdad too after a certain period of time.
Yeah, and yet the Pentagon...
The Iraqis put on, they've got a steel cable now which seems to come with the tank. They put it around the leg, it slipped down the leg, so it was a little bit dangerous, I think, to pull it over. The Marines and the Iraqis are now working together to work out engineering, if you like, the best way to topple this statue.
It's a remarkable scene, isn't it? The forging of these coalition forces with Iraqi civilians to bring down this statue.
There's not a religious message at all. This is just somebody reminding people to please stand back, because now, as I see this, there's a really heavy-duty chain being put around the statue, and I think...
Shots just were fired. I think that they're coming from a building close to the square. So the Iraqis, everyone on the square, kind of, getting low to the ground and moving away. Even as we talk about the importance of seeing people on the streets, there is trepidation and fear, obviously, still.
And from where you're standing in the square, could you see what direction those shots were coming from?
They look like they were coming from the west. It's very difficult to tell, but everyone did look to the west when those shots rang out. People are kind of milling around. I wouldn't say that everyone has kind of disappeared. They're still, from the scene that you can probably see in front of you, they're still milling around, but a little bit more trepidation. Yesterday I saw quite a lot of the looting that you were referring to in southeastern Baghdad. We were in an area where there was a technical college, and people were going into that technical college and taking everything from desks to fridges, swivel office chairs, air conditioning units. So any kind of government or official building, people, once they have been, the areas being by Americans, people do seem to be looting those areas.
Yeah, we are reminded of some of the looting that I guess took place at the Iraqi Olympic Committee building, which was considered the headquarters of Saddam's elder son, Uday. Apparently, anything that could have been removed from that building was taken out. As we watch the quick reaction to some of the gunfire these Marines heard, can you describe to us the level of concerns the Marines have about just these kind of encounters and what it is they have to be prepared for?
One of the big concerns with this, and this is the first time that at least this battalion has encountered anything quite like this, but one of their concerns is that a lot of the enemy that enemy resistance they've come up against in the last, especially week, has involved the use of civilians as shields, or enemy in Iraqi soldiers in plain clothes in urban areas, blending into the local population, working in small gangs of 2 or 3 people they'll fire a weapon, then they'll drop the weapon and simply walk into the street and blend in with other civilians, or walk down the street with a white flag out, as if they had nothing to do with whatever had just happened. And obviously that's a concern for the Marines, because it makes engaging with enemy forces very, very difficult, next to impossible to work out who is friendly and who is not. So balancing out kind of the aggression needed to be able to come into central Baghdad and witness the scenes that we're seeing, and balancing that with not intimidating locals so that you're not scaring anyone is a very, very difficult proposition that they're facing.
We have the screen now divided into two parts where we're keeping an eye on the Marines responding to that sporadic gunfire, and then of course on the right-hand part of the screen, what we've been watching now for an hour and a half, Iraqi citizens at first throwing shoes at the statue, then wrapping a rope around the neck of the statue, now being helped out by a U.S. tow truck vehicle to bring down the statue. We saw another part of a statue come down, another part of Iraq a couple days ago, and I was just looking at a recipe that someone from the U.S. Army used to bring that down, and he just recited the explosive recipe as 8 blocks of C4, 1 M12, that's shock tube, it'll detonate when you push the button, 1 M11, another shock tube, 1 M14, a timer fuse set for 5 minutes, 2 M81 fuse igniters in case the shock tube doesn't blow, 50 feet of detonation core. That's what it took to bring down another statue earlier. Let's bring Christian back into our conversation now. Christian?
Paula, in terms of trying to root out that resistance, certainly back down in the British sector, along with British tanks and ground forces and others, and calling in American firepower, one of the things they tried to do before going into Basra was to systematically wear down the forces that were there, whether they were irregulars, whether they were Fedayeen, or whether they were the regular army that had folded back into the major town there, into Basra. And they would go in and basically in these sort of so-called aggressive patrols, hit-and-run patrols, they would go in, take out a building, take out statues, take out various symbols of party control. They would call in U.S. air support overnight sometimes and blow up Ba'ath Party headquarters. In other words, they were degrading all along this system of control and this system of fear that has permeated every level of the administration of Iraq's capital and other cities over the past several decades. And it was only when they felt that they had done that enough did they go in and basically take the city. And it's, I'm not sure how they're going to do this in Baghdad, because obviously over the weeks we've seen aerial bombardment of various government buildings and things. But the actual going in and maybe getting these buildings where there may be concentrations of militia, it remains to be seen how that will be dispersed. I mean, it looks like for the most part people have sort of melted away and have seen which way this tide has turned. But it'll be interesting to see how they do finally neutralize all those little pockets that sort of certainly Simon was talking about, people who, you know, would put on civilian outfits, fire a gun, melt back, raise a white flag. And again, here you have the Marine up there. What is he doing? Oh, there we have it.
Furling an American flag. Yeah.
Yep. Now this, I have to say, may look like fun, but a lot of the soldiers have been told not to sort of do this kind of triumphalism, because it's not about American flags, but about Iraqi sovereignty and the Iraqi people's country, etc. And we'll see what they actually do with that, with the situation there right now.
And as we watch this picture, Christian, I wanted to add something to what you were just saying. And in an earlier report this morning, our own Rula Amin was saying that members of Iraq's Republican Guard had actually shed their uniforms, put on civilian clothes, and blended in the neighborhoods. And she said it wasn't clear whether they, in fact, would reemerge to fight again or had simply just given up.
Look, the picture.
It'll be very difficult to re-emerge in any kind of coherent form or fashion. The only thing that potentially would be possible would be these guerrilla hit-and-run tactics. But I suppose once the city is flooded with American forces, even that's going to be quite difficult. But obviously it remains a concern. And again, not to keep harping on the British, but they were prepared for that in their cities because of their experience in Northern Ireland, in other wars that they had fought, which essentially were long, long wars. They went all the way back to Borneo and Malaya and, you know, all the other campaigns they'd fought, which took years and years. I don't believe that this is going to be like that, and I think that we are seeing the dwindling hours, but you cannot discount the possibility of isolated, fanatical last stands.
And Christiane,
I think the American flag...
Okay, Carrie, I was just going to say it looks like they're either repositioning the flag or taking it down. It reminded me of something I think we actually witnessed together on live television out of Qasr, when an American flag was very briefly raised over the port, and there was so much reaction from the civilians who were so angry about that show of what they called American imperialism. That flag came down within minutes.
Yes, and that's basically been what has happened in other instances as well. I mean, you know, that they don't want to look like an occupation army. They don't want to look like colonialists, like imperialists, although the urge obviously is strong by individual Marines and soldiers on the ground. I suppose it's a natural instinct. I think the commanders have been very conscious of not doing too much to aggravate and insult, if you like, the people. And don't forget, these images are being broadcast around the whole world as well, specifically around the Arab and Muslim world, where there's been a great deal of opposition to this. And I think what's going to be very interesting over the next hours and days and weeks is how this clear welcome of the U.S. troops in the towns is going to be explained by the media to the people of the Arab world after so many weeks and months of opposing it. And I think that'll be an interesting thing to watch for, how this is going to play in the Arab and Muslim world. How do they explain the pictures that we've seen?
Yeah, Christiane, in fact, as you were just speaking, I was told that one of the Arab networks is already running a story live saying that there should be an Iraqi flag that's going up on the statue before it comes down.
It's an incredibly sensitive issue, this, and I think certainly the commanders that I've talked to anyway have been aware of this. As I say, I suppose often you can't stop individuals who fought a battle and who feel proud of what they've done from doing this kind of thing, and one shouldn't overstate it too much because we haven't seen too much of it. But there you go, there's an Iraqi flag that's being held. You see that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see if that's going to be handed up to the Marines at the top of that platform there. The other thing, Christiane, that I wanted to come back to, which I thought was a very interesting point you were making about British soldiers and what they were up against in Basra. There are reports coming out of there today about the looting that's being done there and food actually being stolen to be sold on the black market. But you were saying that obviously policing Basra is not maybe what the British forces are interested in doing.
Well, you know, this is not me saying it. This is what they have said.
Well,
and
absolutely.
It points to a very dangerous vacuum. It points to a very dangerous vacuum because, you know, look, let's face it. I think that the original idea by the politicians, by the so-called coalition of Britain and the USA, was that, you know, people just wouldn't fight and the police forces would fall on side and they would sort of immediately turn to sort of policing the new Iraq, the free Iraq, that the irregulars, the militias, the army, the Republican Guard would join in the sort of, you know, building and maintaining of order and reconstruction of the new Iraq. Well, that hasn't happened, and there is a vacuum, and the question is who fills that vacuum? And we've seen in other areas and in other countries that we've been in these kinds of situations where unless there is a quick attempt to fill that vacuum, there can be a period of law and, you know, disorder, basically, lawlessness and disorder. And the people don't want that.
Well, it is clear that these Marines... sorry, Christiane, it's clear these Marines got the message about the sensitivities at play here. Now we see one of these pre-Gulf War Iraqi flags being draped around the neck of Saddam Hussein. It was just for a small period of time that we saw that American flag on Saddam Hussein's head. Barbara Starr has some breaking news out of the Pentagon. Barbara, we're going to keep our eye on this picture, but what do you have?
Well, I don't know if it's breaking news, Paula, but I can tell you when that American flag went up, there was an almost audible gasp in some Pentagon offices here. This was not the picture the Pentagon wanted to see. Christiana's right. You know, often in wartime, soldiers do undertake these signs of celebration when they believe they've achieved victory. And it may well be that this small group of troops was just going to put up that flag very briefly and take it down. But of course, not a good reaction from the people there in Baghdad, and the Pentagon has made it very clear through General Tommy Franks out to the troops in the field that this is not about American victory over this country. This is about liberating this country. So the Pentagon's a little happier now, we can tell you, that they see this change of image. Now, as darkness begins to fall in Baghdad, the question is being raised here, you know, what will happen in the city? There are a vast number of American troops there, but they are not wanting to be an occupation force. However, we are told today things are moving so quickly that there is a bit of a scramble on to figure out how to establish security in the city to try and prevent lawlessness, to bring some civil order to the capital in case some of these celebrations go on, in case some of them get out of hand. There were the pictures of looting earlier today. The U.S. military wants to do everything it can, we are told, to bring as much order to the process as possible, but not become a visual occupation force on the streets of Baghdad. So all of this unfolding before our eyes.
And Barbara, what is the Pentagon saying about some of what Martin Savage described just 2 miles away from this scene that we're watching right now on TV, where he encountered heavy fire? He called it an all-out engagement on the campus of Baghdad University.
This is the Pentagon and the military's biggest concern at the moment. They know there are pockets of resistance that continue throughout the city, throughout Iraq, especially in the north. They don't know when and where they're going to come across them. What's really interesting today, as you notice, we haven't seen any aerial action over Baghdad. No bombs dropping from the air because there's so many civilians in the street. They are continuing to maintain air patrols, fighter patrols over Baghdad. And we asked about this, if they could identify a pocket of resistance, such as Baghdad University, and they were fairly sure that they wouldn't inadvertently kill civilians, they would continue some sort of aerial action, aerial attack against these pockets of resistance. But they're becoming so small, so spread out throughout Baghdad, it's going to be very tough, and they're going to have to be tracked down on the ground. The pockets of resistance are a concern, and the other concern that we're hearing about this morning is indeed in the north. They feel that there is still substantial resistance in the town of Tikrit in the north, the ancestral homeland of Saddam Hussein, and they think that is still a situation they are going to have to deal with. Paula?
And then let's just come back to these sensitivities that the Pentagon brass had about the showing of that American flag ever so briefly on the top of Saddam Hussein's head. It now appears as though the pre-Gulf War Iraqi flag has come down. Once again, just for folks that might not have caught the first part of your explanation, talk about this concern about the perception that coalition forces are occupiers. At least that is a perception on some Iraqis' part, and they want to fight that perception.
Exactly, Paula. What the Pentagon knows, what the U.S. military knows, is these pictures are being broadcast throughout the Arab world. They are being seen in the Arab world, and they are not being seen kindly because, of course, there are many sectors of the Arab world that genuinely believe that the U.S. military action in Iraq was not about liberation but about occupation. There are many people in the Arab world that believe it was about the U.S. military, for example, taking over Iraq's oil industry, all of that. The Pentagon has worked very hard to try and not show those images. Paula?
Barbara Starr, we're going to break away from you to catch up with Simon Robinson, who is standing by in the square where it looks like this statue is ready to go. Simon?
The Marines have attached a chain around the neck of Saddam and are now reversing this large tank away from the statue, and looks like it's about to go, as you said. When the American flag went up, there were no boos, but not many cheers either. And then the pre-Kuwait War, pre-Gulf War Iraqi flag was brought out, and there were cheers, a lot of clapping, cries. Of course, the Iraqi flag changed after the Gulf War. Saddam added a religious message in the middle of the flag, and the flag that was put up there was the old Iraqi flag, the flag, I guess, that older Iraqis remember from the days before Saddam. This tank now is reversing through a crowd of a few hundred people, perhaps 1,000 people, reversing away from the statue. I'm not sure how far back it has to get before the statue will start toppling. It's late afternoon in Iraq. Next to, on the other side of the square, I can see there's a large mosque. There's a large hotel behind me, and all around Iraqi families out watching this momentous day in Baghdad and its history.
Simon, as we watch this, I wanted to ask you a question about whether you were aware of any kind of command that went out to these Marines to bring that American flag down, because there is so much sensitivity about perhaps this being seen as a sign of occupation, not liberation.
I'm not sure in this instance, but I do know that through the campaign, Marines have been told to take flags off vehicles. They weren't allowed to fly the flags from tanks or armored personnel carriers or anything like that. That was definitely a directive. And I know in the case of the battalion that I was traveling with, the colonel often made a point of telling his troops, if you score a try, if you score a touchdown in a football match, just act as if you've done it before. Walk back to the halfway line and get ready for the next play. There's not to be any cheering. There's no sense of triumphalism. He often tells his troops, act as if you've been to the barbecue before. Don't act as if it's your first barbecue. In other words, don't get too excited. Just act as if it's something you've done before, even if you happen to be 19 years old and perhaps on your first overseas trip, which is to Iraq. So there's definitely been directives from above not to be too triumphal about this whole thing.
So you were saying when the American flag went up for that very short period of time, there were no boos, but there was no cheering either. But it wasn't until the Iraqi flag was wrapped around the neck of Saddam that there was real cheering going on.
Exactly. And they're now tightening. The statue's starting to topple. It's coming forward. They're winding in the chain. They're not moving the vehicle back. They're just bringing it in rather like a tow truck. And in fact, the right leg is snapped. The left leg is going. There's pieces of debris coming off the statue. And now it falls. A cheer goes around the square. People are waving their hands. And the statue, the hollow statue of Saddam is left dangling from this marble plinth. People now throwing objects at it, throwing rocks and pieces of wood they can find, throwing dirt up into his face.
Does it look like that tow truck vehicle will try to move back so the Saddam is not left in this dangling position and be taken to the ground?
It is moving very slightly, and they're again tightening that. It's almost they will seemingly pull it off the pedestal completely. They're clearing people away, and now it's come off completely and falls to the ground. More cheers go up, and people are now on the statue of Saddam, dancing up and down. People are rushing to the square to in fact jump on the statue of Saddam. Mostly they're men in there. The women and children seem to be standing back. I see families though getting closer, someone holding a child up to see the scene. And people are bouncing up and down on this hollow statue of Saddam.
Simon, if you would, could you hold your phone away from your mouth and maybe we can hear some of the ambient sound coming from the crowd?
I will. I'll walk closer to the scene and I'll hold the phone up. I'm now nearly at the scene. The sound of the tank might drown out some of the cheers, but I'll hold the phone up. That was the sound of Iraqis cheering and jumping on that statue.
Can you give us an idea, Simon, how many more people have arrived now that the statue's down? I think you said at one point you thought that maybe there were 1,000 people in the square?
I'd say there'd be 1,500 people now, and as I'm up near where the statue was, I can look down the street and there's a lot of vehicles arriving from the southeastern direction, which is, of course, the direction that the Marines arrived from today. So it's an area that's being cleared, that's relatively safe, and more people arriving all the time. This square is really starting to fill up.
And a lot of symbolism at play here. You were saying that this is the pre-Gulf War flag now that is attached, or at least they're attempting to attach to the base of what used to be a statue of Saddam Hussein. And I guess the one thing that is missing from this is what was added after the Gulf War, which was a religious statement saying God is great.
Exactly. That's it. This is a pre-Gulf War flag that they're putting up, a flag that existed between the country's independence in the middle of last century, and some young men are attaching it to the plinth where, until a few moments ago, Saddam stood.
Now, Simon, the last time we spoke with you, you were describing some of the Marines breaking away after hearing some gunfire, you thought, coming in from the west. What happened with that?
I'm not sure. It seemed to come from a building on the western side of the square, but no gunshots since then. And the Marines, again, are relaxed. I can see one Marine with some yellow flowers given to him by an Iraqi, and he's put them in his Kevlar helmet. And other Marines walking around without helmets on, with just their floppy sun hats. Most still have their helmets on, and most are kind of aware of the situation around them, but relatively relaxed, I would say.
Well, Simon, if you wouldn't mind standing by, I want to check in with Christian Amanpour, who has basically been with us over the last 2 hours as we've watched this painstaking process of bringing down the statue. At first, Iraqis pelting it with shoes, then finding a ladder, climbing the ladder, wrapping a rope noose around Saddam Hussein's neck, later coming back to the base of the statue and attempting to take it down with all we could see was one sledgehammer. Well, now it's down, Christian.
Yes, and you know, it's the method of dictatorships to have their image looming over the people at every possible place, whether it's statues or portraits or tile murals or whatever it is, towns and streets and buildings named after Saddam Hussein. And so this does go to the very heart of the control and the fear apparatus, and so the few people who are around there really enjoyed that scene. And I think that as an anecdote to how seriously the Iraqi regime took the whole image thing, I remember being in Baghdad a few years ago and doing a vaguely tongue-in-cheek report about all these painted murals and mentioning Saddam Hussein smiling, and I was very quickly hauled into the information ministry and given a strict, telling off about how one does not make fun of the great leader. And this is obviously a massive symbol. It's not just a statue in a square. This is it. This is the regime. This is the symbolism of, of how they keep control. And down this one has gone. Again, it was a big psychological tool used in other towns. Back in Basra, the British would send in the early days before they went in, their tanks to blow up the statues, to crush through the murals. And so from the very beginning, the whole image thing has been a powerful psychological weapon, or rather destroying it has as well.
And we've learned so much about Saddam Hussein's vanity over the last several years. A couple of documentaries that have just been released recently over the last couple months showing the degree to which he was involved not only in some of the details on his portraits, but the extravagant architectural details you see all over.
Showing you all through the morning. We heard our Brett Baer reporting from the Pentagon just a few moments ago that the Joint Chiefs Chair Myers, again with an understatement, him saying, "We will know more soon, but the Iraqi people are tired of this aggression." And, well, these pictures probably say a whole lot more than that one sentence there. But let's get more. Some military leaders have been talking to our Adam Housley, and he joins us from Kuwait City. Adam.
It's a definite answer. Certainly you want rest, but you certainly in some instances want that number one, but you want positioning also.
I think health always is the overriding factor. I mean, Van Horn has to be healthy, and plus when you play in the regular season, then you have about 3 or 4 days off before. So if you can rest him through those last 2 games, and it's an extra 3 or 4 days of health before the first game of the playoffs, Van Horn will get it back in the first half of game 1, but that health is critical.
Our officials tonight, Steve Janvey, Mark Wunderlich, and Jess Kersey. We also want to pass along another story that has moved on the wires here late this afternoon. An unconfirmed report from AP, from the Associated Press, that 2 more members have been added to the U.S. Olympic team, one of which is Allen Iverson of the Philadelphia 76ers, and the other reportedly is Indiana center and all-star Jermaine O'Neal, for Coach Larry Brown, who, of course, will coach that Olympic team.
It's about time Allen's been put on that team.
And out of bounds on the opening tap. And Philadelphia will inbound the ball. Philadelphia comes in with a record of 46-31. They have won 4 consecutive road games. They beat Detroit Tuesday by 17. Of course, Detroit playing without the injured Ben Wallace, at least until the first week of the playoffs. And that's an injury that will hurt the Pistons. Here's Iverson. And now to Snow with the shot clock showing 10. Allen Iverson with his first offering and cannot go. Rebound is picked up by Tony Delk, who now starts at the point for rookie J.R. Bremer. As Delk goes inside to Paul Pierce, working on Snow. And a rebound by Bateen.
And that's critical for them to get some offensive rebounds. The Celtics shoot a lot of perimeter shots. Pierce and Walker take a lot, and a lot of bad shots. They're not shooting a very good percentage, either one of them. They got to get second shot opportunities.
Well, a lot of that is hustle, too, because if you're shooting deep shots, the rebound is coming back very long. Those are floor rebounds in most instances.
This is Tony Bateen, and a rebound by Allen Iverson inside for the 76ers. Iverson is the number 4 scorer coming into tonight in the NBA. There's Eric Snow, picked up by Pierce. Screen by Thomas. And into Coleman. Nice, wide open. Greg Buckner, a play they worked on this morning in shoot-around.
Well, when you talk about injuries, if you look at Allen Iverson, Kevin, he's got about 5 different things wrapped up on his body right now. How much more can he be injured?
Well, next to Earl Boykins, he might be the lightest guy in the league, and he's leading the league in minutes played. Hasn't missed a game all year.
Nice entry pass from